Welcome to the first iteration of my online class series. Today we're going to pick up from kind of where we left off from the Gilded Age living conditions photographs, and we are going to be looking more at the politics of the Gilded Age. Due to the living conditions and that resulted in the Gilded Age from many people coming to live in areas such as New York City, Chicago, Pittsburgh, areas like that, the government had a difficult time keeping the city kind of clean and also establishing basic services, as we kind of saw in the filthy living conditions that people were living in our lesson, in which we looked at those photographs of kind of the Lower East Side of Manhattan and other places like that. Because of the kind of lax oversight that was being used in a lot of the cities during this time period, we see the rise of what's known as political rings. And these are basically just kind of large organizations of politicians whose general goal is to get reelected and kind of line their pockets with public money through usually kind of corrupt deals and very corrupt. The general idea is that political rings during this time were very corrupt. Additionally, the most famous or infamous of these rings was what's known as the Tweed Ring, which is run in New York City by a man named William Tweed, seen here on the right in a Magic the Gathering style card. He ran kind of another name for his ring was known as the Tammany Hall Ring, and his kind of many people knew about these rings and their corruption. However, a lot of the time what wound up happening was that people would blame immigrants for the rise of these rings. They thought it's immigrants who are the reason that these rings existed, not any other reason. The reason that they blamed these immigrants, of course, was because they believed that these people kind of had, quote, narrow horizons and, quote, meager moral and religious training. The idea being that these immigrants they're not as smart as us native, quote unquote, native Americans, and they don't really know as much about politics, and they're able to be duped by these dastardly politicians who are able to manipulate these kind of weak-minded people into doing their bidding. Kind of that was a line of thinking that occurred during that time. And of course, Tweed's infamous ring was eventually brought down through the work of newspapers and publicists and people who we're going to look more at them during our next unit on the progressives, which is people trying to reform the ills of the Gilded Age. And we're going to look at them a little bit more in the next unit, but this is kind of a preview. Those people will be called muckrakers, and the idea being that they kind of stir up the kind of evil underbelly of society and show it to the light to try to change it. But Thomas Nast, a man who we talked about with some of his political cartoons in the past when we were doing Reconstruction, was most famous for his political cartoons of Boss Tweed, seen in this political cartoon in the kind of left center, the very fat man with a long nose. If you were to pause the video and go back and look at the picture on the last slide, you would see the very striking resemblance between the Nast's depiction and the actual man, because that was kind of the point, was that he's making it so that everybody knows what he looks like. And you can see in this cartoon he is blaming Tweed for losing the public's money. So kind of an interesting little thing where they're trying to say, who stole the public's money? And everybody's kind of pointing to the guy. Oh, it wasn't me, it was him, it was him, it was that guy, it wasn't me. Don't look at me, it wasn't that guy, it was the other guy. But it eventually wound up coming in a circle. So kind of the message being that everybody worked together to steal the public's money, but nobody is really owning up to it. They're all kind of saying, oh, it was somebody else. They're being politicians, they don't want to be associated with stealing money. If you were a politician and you said, and somebody was like, you stole money, and you'll be like, you're darn right I stole money. Nobody's going to vote for you because of that. You're not going to, politically as a career move, you're not really going to admit to that. That's kind of what he's trying to say, or one of the things he's trying to point out. Another thing that we see during this era, and we kind of talked about it with the views of political rings being able to exist because of the stupidity of immigrants, is that we see xenophobia rising in the Native American, native as in they were not children directly of immigrants, native as in they had been living here for several generations, not to be confused with Native Americans, the ethnicity. Generally, the older citizens who have been living here for longer blamed the issues affecting the United States at this time on newcomer immigrants. And the idea being that these people thought, well, we've been here longer, so this is our country. This isn't your country. It's our country. We've been here the longest. And this kind of brings up a term, I don't know if you've heard of it, it's called WASPs. And generally the people who are these old comers, as the book calls them. I'm not really a fan of that word. It just sounds a bit strange. I think there's better words that could be used to replace it. But the book says old comers. A lot of these, if you look through history, you notice are what's known as WASPs. And what that generally means is white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestants. So white is kind of obvious. Anglo-Saxon usually means they are kind of ethnically from the British Isles, mostly England and Scotland, and then maybe some of Europe as well. Not a lot. Usually it's England and Scotland. And Protestant being Protestant Catholicism, so not Roman Catholic, but Protestant Catholic, which is kind of explains a lot of the anti-Irish and anti-Catholic political cartoons that we're going to look at later on in a few lessons. We're going to have a Zoom meeting on that in the future. Unless, of course, when I edit this, it winds up being that this Zoom meeting happens before you see this lesson, so in which case that will have already happened. Either way, it'll be exciting. One of the ways that the old comers reacted to the people, these kind of immigrants coming in, was they founded something known as the Immigration Restriction League. And what this was a lobbying organization that was supposed to persuade Congress to pass laws restricting what they deemed, quote-unquote, undesirable immigrants. So we're going to pass laws to keep those people from coming into this country. Those people who shouldn't be here because they're undesirable. They shouldn't come in. So we're going to pass laws to say they can't come in. And these old comers claimed that these new immigrants were the people who were the main cause of the increase in crime and the increase in strikes that were plaguing the nation. And they believe that it's because of these people who have this questionable moral character and questionable religious character, as we talked about with the political rings a few slides ago. This is kind of where that additionally came from. There's a lot of people who are working in these low-wage jobs and who are the poor in society who are immigrants. And they kind of are just saying because they're immigrants, that's why they're in these poor jobs, and because they have this meager moral character, they're the ones causing all the problems. Anyway, so we see these discussed, and where the way that these sentiments manifested was in different ways, and we're going to actually see the reactions to some of these different ways in our political cartoon lesson, whenever that may happen. We will see it in the form of a literacy test that was proposed by the Immigration Restriction League to be administered to new immigrants. They have to pass this test before they can enter the country. The issue with this test was that it discriminated against regions of the world where education is not mandatory, nor is it available. So kind of areas where they didn't have mandated education because, say, it was an agrarian country that did a lot of farming, so people were needed to go on the farm and work on the farm rather than be in school, because it was more practical to the people at the time to work on the farm rather than go to school and learn this reading and writing and arithmetic kind of thing. If you know where I'm coming from there. We talked about that, I think, a couple times in class previously. Additionally, we also see the president getting involved. Grover Cleveland called the literacy test underhanded because it does not say what it really means. And William Howard Taft said that the United States needs the labor of all immigrants, and we should teach them how to read. So I think that's quite interesting in that Cleveland is saying that this thing is supposed to be a test to see how literate you are, but actually what it is it's a way of keeping people out of the country. It's not actually a test. It's more of a blockade or a barrier. And Taft is saying that not only do we need these people coming into this country, but also if they don't know how to read already, that's our responsibility as a country to then take these people under our wing, so to speak, and then teach them how to read and educate them and teach them everything that they need to know to be competitive in the modern world. And I think that's quite heartwarming and kind of very, very touching, I think, to hear that from President Taft. Overall, the general belief in the country was that America was a, quote, nation of nations and a home for people of all ethnicities. So saying that, and you still see this today as well, in that the United States is a country that is made up of people from other countries. So other people who don't have really a place to be, or maybe they don't really desire to be there anymore, they can come here and have their own country, and this is their country, a country made up of people from other countries. So that is what it means. So by uniting in this one country, this one place that is the United States of America, we are a nation made up of other nations. That is what unites us together. It is just the fact that we all live here in the same place and kind of share this newfound American identity. Our last slide in this video portion is talking about kind of some of the other methods that were used to deal with people during this period, was something called the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which prohibited all immigration from China for 10 years, so until 1892. And later they passed the Geary Act, which renewed the Chinese Exclusion Act for another 10 years, so to 1892, to 1900 even, I believe. Yes. No, 1902. 1902, yes. To the year 1902 is when this was supposed to then expire. Additionally, we see measures taken to deal with immigration from Japan. In the case of what was known as the Gentleman's Agreement, was President Theodore Roosevelt persuaded the Japanese government to ask their citizens to remain in Japan and to not immigrate to the United States. The term, because of this interaction, the term Gentleman's Agreement became a slang term for any similar act or agreement to prevent immigrants from entering the United States, in which we kind of talk to a country and say, hey, please don't send your people here, tell them to not immigrate. That we'll kind of just agree. We won't write anything down, we'll just kind of say, hey, don't send your people here. It's kind of an underhanded, little bit, supposed to be kind of under the table, we don't want to write anything down on paper so we don't look like we're being racist, but in reality we're kind of being fairly discriminatory in our practices. And that being said, this is the end of the video. Thank you for tuning in. I will publish another one later on that will continue our kind of PowerPoint lecture. The next one of these will be looking kind of at the reaction to the reaction in the sense of reformers and progressives, as well as kind of more of assimilation of immigrant cultures in terms of education, in both secondary education and higher education, as well as some populist and political type reforms. And then by that point, we will all be done with this unit. We will move on to the next unit. So I will see you in the next video.